Okay, thank you. I'm just going to give a little bit of background about the UK Web Archive to put us in context, and then say a little bit about our collection development policies. I'm going to touch on more of the policy space and ethical issues regarding social media. Helena is going to talk a little bit more about the practical aspects of archiving social media. So, uh, the British Library has been archiving websites on a small scale selective basis since 2004, with the explicit permission of website publishers. So from 2004 to 2013, this process resulted in a data set of about 15,000 websites, which are made available through our website, which we call the Open UK Web Archive. In April 2013, there was a big step change in our operations as legal deposit legislation was extended to include websites. So this placed an obligation on the British Library and the UK legal deposit libraries to collect the UK web at scale. And I should say that the UK Web Archive is a partnership of the UK Legal Deposit Libraries, the British Library, the National Libraries of Scotland and Wales, Trinity College Dublin, Bodleian Libraries Oxford and Cambridge University Library. We've then been performing broad domain crawls of the UK web space since April 2013, when the legislation came into effect. So there's a slide with some numbers here which shows you the scale of the operation. So this is to sort of put us in a sharp contrast with the community archives that Sharon has just been talking about. We're acquiring on an annual basis about 5 to 10 million hosts. This is over 2 billion items, 70 to 100 terabytes of compressed data. So far, we think that we have about 470 terabytes of compressed data. So a little bit about the non-print legal deposit regulations. Our collection development policy is essentially framed by the regulations. The regulations allow us to collect online works published in the UK. They're in scope for legal deposit if they meet the following criteria. They're made available to the public from a website with a UK top-level domain name, or they are made available to the public by a person and any of that person's activities relating to the creation or the publication of the work take place within the UK. In practice, the way that we implement this at scale is that we can automatically scope in websites that are on a UK top-level domain name. So this would be .uk.scot.cymru, or we can identify through a GeoIP lookup websites that are physically hosted on servers in the UK. This, of course, leaves a massive tranche of data that we're not collecting automatically, that content which is on .coms or other domain names. If those websites are considered UK, they are in scope for us and we can archive them, but it needs manual identification. So a curator has to look at a website and say, yes, we believe this is a UK website. There's evidence of a postal address, or we've communicated with the publisher. So what is out of scope for us? This is in the terms of the legislation. Sites where the function of the site is predominantly an audio or visual platform. So this would be YouTube channels or BBC iPlayer. We can archive websites where videos are embedded into the website, but there's quite a detailed explanation of when the video is considered incidental to the website. We don't archive private intranets and emails. We only archived published material. We don't archive personal data in social networking sites or social media content that is available to restricted groups. And so, as we'll explore later, this is a very grey area. So what is considered published on social networks and what is considered private is there's not really a clear legal definition, and even in the eyes of the content creators, this is probably not very clear. In terms of social media platforms, what we're archiving at the moment, apart from our legislative framework, there are technical issues, which means that we can't archive all platforms, or some platforms are easier for us to archive than others. So Facebook is very, very locked down. There was a point where we were able to archive some Facebook content, but Facebook is always a few steps ahead, and they're very, very reluctant to allow crawler access. With YouTube videos, as I say, we are able to collect selected YouTube videos. We've had varying degrees of success with collecting YouTube videos. One of our issues is that because we are geared up to do bulk crawling, we do whole domain crawling, our tool set is geared up to collect broadly rather than high fidelity crawl such as Web Recorder or Social Feed Manager handles social media a lot better. So we don't have tools that are modular enough to allow us to successfully archive video. We are looking at implementing a browser crawler, so this is a browser-based crawler, but this is something that we'd have to be very, very selective about. We'd have to allocate resource to a curator to say these videos are important, and so that we'd spend extra time curating those videos. We have a second layer of problems is in that the acquiring of content is actually relatively easy, but the playback of content adds another layer of complexity. So the software that we're using for playing back our web archives at the moment is a JavaScript-based version of the Wayback software. We're moving over to the Python-based version of the Wayback software, but this isn't allowing us to render videos at the moment. So this is something that we're going to have to address before we can collect videos successfully. So Twitter, as you're probably aware, is slightly more friendly. The terms and conditions of the Twitter platform are a little bit more accessible. Twitter API is quite user-friendly. So we have a little bit more success with archiving Twitter. In terms of our collection development policy for social media, as I say, we're archiving it on a selective basis. So we're archiving a very small handful of social media accounts. This is usually for a special collection. So in addition to our broad whole domain crawlings, we archive around particular thematic events. So we might, for example, look at political events, UK general elections. We've been quite involved in archiving the EU referendum and Brexit debates at the moment. So certain important social media accounts will put the effort in and archive them if they're related to a special collection. Or perhaps for significant UK figures, for example, the Twitter account of 10 Downing Street and the Prime Minister. As I said, the difficulty with social media is that they all have to be manually identified and scoped in. Currently, there's various staff across the legal deposit libraries that are doing the selection within their own areas of interest, but we're trying to do much more in reaching out to those communities that are creating the content, so that we firstly reflect underrepresented communities. Um, and we secondly sort of contract the subject expertise in those areas that we're not necessarily the experts in. So, for example, with our BM Black, Asian, minority, ethnic collections, we're reaching out to appropriate communities there so that they can tell us what we should be collecting. But it's a very, very sort of small scale operation at the moment. We occasionally have requests of, if you like, a voluntary deposit. So this would be perhaps more of a records management function. So some institutions have asked us, could we archive their official Twitter accounts? So we're certainly very, very happy to do that. With regards to ethical considerations, there's obviously extra cautions needed when archiving social media. As I said, we don't archive private data, so we don't archive those social media accounts that constitute a private members forum or direct messaging, but we do deliberately archive data that is personal. So this is the material that the researchers currently and in the future are asking us about. So this sort of information, when anonymised and when aggregated, is absolutely what the researchers need. And we feel that for those researchers studying life in contemporary Britain, it's going to be very difficult for them to do this without having access to this kind of data. So we do deliberately collect personal data. At the same time, we have a duty to protect the person's privacy and make sure information that's potentially sensitive and potentially harmful is not freely available. Regarding personal and data privacy, there's currently no specific and legal right to be forgotten beyond the General Data Protection Regulations and the UK Data Protection Act, which put in place provisions for the protection of personal data that could cause substantial damage and distress. But there isn't a legal basis by which an individual can ask for material to be deleted if it's been lawfully archived in the first place. And as a public body, the UK legal deposit libraries have derogation from the right to erasure under the following terms: in order to comply with a legal obligation, for the performance of a task carried out in the public interest, and for archiving purposes. But aside from this legal environment, there are also ethical considerations to take into account. So we have to be very, very careful with personal data, and we mitigate the risk of exposing sensitive personal data by being selective about what we archive in the first place. Secondly, through controlling access. So the default position for the UK Web Archive data is reading room only access. There's a very small subset of data that we make publicly available, and that is with the consent of the website publishers. And we have quite a robust notice and takedown policy if we mistakenly publish a potentially damaging sensitive data. This is, I don't think you'll be able to read the text, but this is basically a data checklist and our general principles which we look to when considering notice and takedown requests. So this is just to say that there's certain circumstances where we would give data particularly special considerations. So if material had been published about a child or been published by a child or by vulnerable persons, for example, this data would be more likely to be redacted if it was published. We're hitting the generation now where children have grown up with adults posting, for example, photographs about them, and they haven't necessarily had any control over that publishing process and what happens when they're, for example, situations change when they are an adult. Also, if material has perhaps been leaked or maliciously posted online without the data subject's consent, we would look at it in a more cautious way. But we also, as the library, want to protect the public record and to hold public figures to accountability. So we might look differently, for example, on people who had posted if they had a public role, or if that information had been in the public for a very long period of time. So this is not a very sort of precise formula at the moment, and it's still evolving. But I was just wanting to highlight some of the issues that come into play here with personal data. And this is my last point. I touched on it a minute or two ago. So under our strategic framework, the legal deposits libraries acquire and make available material that is published. So we're trying to do a bit of work about understanding what is considered published and what is considered private data in the context of the web and social media. There is the Department of Digital Culture, Media, Sport does have some guidelines about this. They're helpful, but not massively helpful, and they define private data as that which is only available to a restricted group of persons, works behind a barrier such as user credentials, are actually considered open. So if you have to input your email address to access a website, that material is still considered published, open data, and the legal deposit libraries can acquire it. But as I say, what do we understand about how the public perceives this space? So if a person is posting to a public message board, and the screenshot here is a post on the Mumsnet website. Mumsnet is a massive research importance here. The issue here is that the poster is narked with the way that people are spelling Paralympics or Para-Olympics. But there's a wealth of information on Mumsnet, so we feel that the comments on this site is really valuable information to preserve, but not very much research has been done about how people contributing to forums such as this see themselves as publishing, and even if they do sort of appreciate that the comments are going out to the public web, how aware are they of organisations such as the British Library that are going to be preserving this information in perpetuity? So that's just to sort of set down the point about this grey area about what is considered published and what is considered private in social media, perhaps for further discussion. And that's about me.
Okay, so I'm just going to run through the quick steps of the process of web archiving, and then go through some of the challenges of that process, and then talk about how you can get involved. So first we identify targets, that websites that are in UK scope for capture. Then we send out our crawl bots. Then we download into work files. So work is the file format for archived websites. Then we index the collection. So we've got full text index, so you can search across the whole archive. And then we play back via the website interface, so that's our website address there. And then we carry out quality assurance on some content. And then we request open access license for some websites. And okay, so we're into the first challenge. Okay, so identifying. This is really, really hard. So we have we can scope in all the UK top level domains, as Nicola had mentioned before, and everything hosted in the UK, but there's so much more out there that's not published on in one of those forms. So we have to manually identify this content and add it to the archive. So I mean, these are just three, WordPress has got many different top level domains as well, and then twitter.com, it's all hosted outside of the UK. So we have to manually identify UK published content, and that can be quite challenging because people don't always say they're based in the UK or have a flag or something like that, or an address. So then we send out our crawl bots. So as Nicola mentioned, it's quite challenging to get high fidelity captures of things like social media and other kind of really dynamic web content, because we're going to use Heritrix, which is great for large scale crawling, but not so good for kind of bespoke websites. And you're going to hear later today about Web Recorder and Social Feed Manager. Those kind of more, it's better for those individual content. Then we download the websites into work files, and although we've experimented a little bit with Web Recorder and Social Feed Manager, it's quite challenging for us to ingest that into our archive and how we integrate that into our system as well for metadata and making access. So although we'd like to implement these things, it's going to be a while before we can implement it into their workflow. So then playback. This is, so I've skipped 4 because indexing, there's no issue across content. So number 5 was playback. And this is quite challenging because the technology for capturing web content is very different to the technology for playing it back so that you can view it. And we, through our website, it should look and feel as it did originally. The Heritrix can only follow clickable links, so search boxes don't work. But as long as you can click through to content, we should be able to get it. So this is an Eventbrite page from the live web, and you can see it's got a nice image and stuff on it. And in our old website, so our new website was only launched a couple of weeks ago. On the old website, we used Open Wayback, and you can see the images were missing. So before, we weren't sure, did we just not capture it, or is it just not playing back? There was no way to really tell. Was it the technology for playing back, or was it the archive technology? But in our new system now, we're using Python Wayback, and you can see actually we do have the images. So it's just an issue with the playback software. But at the moment, this is our current display of Twitter accounts, and I think WordPress blogs look a little bit like this as well. So it's not that we haven't captured the content. As Nicola mentioned, we have a lot of legal restrictions on making content accessible outside of a reading room. So with a lot of web archives, they either have the majority open access, small amount closed access. We're quite unique. We have the majority closed access and a little bit open access, because mostly it's either closed or open. And so this is a whitelisting issue. So we have to whitelist content to make it accessible. But websites like Twitter and WordPress and stuff, they use this third-party content to kind of give the kind of the visual, the images and the style sheets and stuff. But if we make that open accessible at the moment, we're not sure if we can guarantee that it's not going to make other content that we don't have open access permission for accessible. So we're just kind of in that transition phase from implementing the new service and kind of working out these kind of issues that we have. So if you do see this, don't worry, we do have the content. It's just not visible at the moment, but we are working on it. So carrying out quality assurance. So it's very difficult. We've got such a large scale of content to actually look at everything, because that's all we have at the moment. Our QA process is just visually comparing the archive content to the live web, and then actually identifying issues on how the website is developed as the reasons why we haven't captured stuff. So there's very little work we can do to kind of remedy it. Sometimes we can implement some things like adding additional seeds to the record, but there is very little we can do manually. And so requesting open access is very difficult. A lot of people don't give contact details anymore. They don't have addresses. Even if they do have an address, they may not have an email address. So we just send an automated email through our web archivist email account, and it goes directly to the address that we get online. But also most websites only give a generic info address, and it looks like spam. So we're contacting them. We're the UK Web Archive. Most people have never heard of us. So they just ignore it, or it goes straight to their spam folder. They don't even see it. So it's quite challenging on that cases. And then also sometimes people just reply and say, yes, that's okay, but they don't actually fill in the form. So, so our return rate in general is about 20% roughly, but sometimes with some special curated collections, we make a special effort and where we actually call up everyone personally, send personal emails, and then we might get a return rate of maybe closer to 40%, but it's still quite limited. And some people can't give us open access requests even if they want to because they've used third-party copyright images and they don't have it as part of their license that they can make it open access. And then also medical advice websites, because medical advice is always changing, they don't want older advice to be more accessible as well. And then sometimes big organizations, they don't know who to ask for this permission because we're the only people asking them. So it's kind of a difficult question. And then so as Sharon mentioned as well, like community-based websites are at risk. There's a lot of, there's a knowledge gap on how to actually make things more archivable. And then also there's a financial gap as well. So for this example here, the Football Collective, it's a WordPress site, but they were able to manage to get a UK top level domain. But lots of other people can't afford to get a UK top level domain as well. And then in this example, they have a lot of video and audio content, but it's all on YouTube, SoundCloud, and iTunes. So that's not archivable. So it's about kind of getting the message out. I think I have it in a different post, but we have tips and stuff like that for how to make your website more archivable. So it's just about getting the information out there and then kind of helping them to find the steps on how to actually make this more accessible for the archive. So we would recommend keep the SoundCloud and iTunes, but just have the content embedded also to the website, because if it's embedded to it, it's easier for us to collect. Because a lot of, as Nicola mentioned with social media, it's the same with all cloud storage as well. They block robots from getting into their content. So even if it is open access for everyone to get when you're on the live web, they block the crawlers for archiving it as well as other kind of bad crawlers. So a few tips on how to make something more archivable is to ensure that video and audio content is not coming from somewhere else, so that you've embedded it into the site. So if you've got a database-driven site, make sure you've got a sitemap, because we can only follow clickable links. So if you have to do a search to find that content, the crawler's never going to get there because it can't follow the trail. And so with robots.txt, you can exclude things like calendars are really big crawler traps, because calendars never end. When the crawler goes in there, it can go on forever. So then it gets stuck and it causes problems for your website and also causes problems for the general crawler as well. And that's the blog post I just mentioned with some tips. And I'm sure Sarah will share the slides and stuff afterwards as well. So there's also this other great website that was developed by the Web Archive communities, archiveready.com. So you can put your URL in and just check how archive ready you are. And then it will give you some indication about where your problems might be. But not all websites can be 100% archivable, because this is the British Library website, and 84% is pretty good. But we have a catalogue, an online catalogue, and that's search interaction as well. There's lots of dynamic stuff that you need there that we're never going to be able to capture, and we don't need to capture either. So it's just about finding the balance of, like, if you've got documents, that it can be archived and accessed as well, because we don't want to shape how people publish, but we also need to be able to capture a record of that as well. So it's kind of finding the happy medium. So you can get involved. We're always looking for volunteers to get involved. So you can save a UK website. So on our website, we have a Save a UK website tab, and you can just fill in the information there. It's just a few simple steps with the URL, contact details as well, if you're the site owner, so we can pass you on the open access permission form. And we save anything. We don't pass any judgment on the quality of the content. We, because we leave that's up for the end user to do in their analysis. We just want to archive UK published content. So it just has to be anything UK. So some of the sites we have, there's an online enthusiast collection, and one of the websites is the Carpets of Witherspoons. So it's quite an eclectic mix of content we have in the archive. We've got a little bit of everything. So, and that's good because it represents what's going on in the UK. So, but if your content's from outside the UK, you can also nominate with the UK, with the Internet Archive. They have a Save a Page now. And there's a few other web archives that also take public nominations as well. So the Portuguese Web Archive does it also. And we want to work more with the Living Knowledge Network, which is working the national libraries, working with local libraries, and then getting more involved in the communities. So we are hoping to have more support materials for people getting involved in web archiving, because there's only a few of us on our team, even though we are one of the biggest UK web web archive teams in the world, there's only a few of us, and the UK is so big and so diverse. We need to get more subject experts involved, and it's also people in local libraries are more up to date with what's going on locally as well, so we can get more community-based groups represented in the archive as well. So we need you. So you can save a website. You can create a collection if you want to get in touch with us to curate a collection as well. We're always open to working with subject experts. And subject experts don't need to be academics. They can be just anybody who knows a lot about a subject. And and I want you to ask 5 friends if they know a website that could be saved. So you've got some homework. So we're hoping to see more nominations next week and when we check our email. And so when you fill in the form, it just goes to the web archivist email account, gets monitored by our assistant web archivist, and we just assess if it's UK published or not, and then we add it to the archive. So it's a very simple process. And these are some useful links as well. So it's to our website, to our blog, which has lots of information about some collections we're working on, but also a lot of blogs by our technical lead, Andy Jackson, about explaining the processes and the things in a really accessible way. So you don't need to be a technical expert to understand how the process of web archiving works. And then we've got a few little short videos. And then Shine is another data set that was everything.uk archived by the Internet Archive from 96 to when our non-print legal deposit regulations came into effect in April 2013. And you could search across that as well. And then we have some data sets that you can just, if you want to do some big data analysis with, and they're all open access.